Thank you all very much for joining us. Good evening. I'm Mari Angulo, marketer and publicist at Angulo Marketing. I've worked closely with Carrie and her book, Seduced Into Darkness, Transcending My Psychiatrist's Sexual Abuse. And I am honored to welcome you to her live on Zoom event, presented by her publisher, Terra Nova Books. And Scott, if you would wave there, Scott Gerber for Terra Nova. I will be turning the mic over to Dr. Michael Plout in a moment, but first I want to review a few things. First of all, Carrie hopes that you will all turn on your video during her presentation in the bar of icons at the bottom of your Zoom window. It means a lot to her to be able to see her audience. Please sit back and enjoy. Now we welcome Dr. Michael Plout, the gentleman who wrote the afterword for Carrie's book. After him, we will hear from Dr. Ann Philmeyer, the president of Southwestern College. And Michael, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Mary, and I'm delighted to be a part of this program. And I was very much honored to have been invited by Carrie to write the afterword for her excellent book. I am a retired psychologist, and I spent most of my career on the faculty of the University of Maryland School of Medicine in Baltimore. An issue I have been very much interested in since the early 80s was that of professional-client boundaries. In other words, where is the appropriate balance between closeness and separateness in a professional-client relationship? In all such relationships, there is a power differential between the professional and client because the client depends on the knowledge, skill, and judgment of the professional. For this reason, one of the standards that is pretty consistent in such relationships is that any sexual intimacy is considered unethical. It does not matter which person initiates such a relationship or whether the client gives consent, it is still unethical. In the early 90s, some of us in Maryland were concerned about this issue and attempted to get a bill passed through the legislature to set up a task force to address some of these issues. It was during this time that I had the pleasure of meeting Carrie, who was preparing to testify before the legislature as we attempted to pass this bill. Unfortunately, Carrie had been sexually abused by her psychiatrist a number of years earlier while a college student. The intimate relationship that she had with her therapist, however, was not just a sexual one. The therapist, who she calls Dr. Romano in her book, did a number of things to gradually increase their level of closeness, setting up a pattern of behavior that we often describe as a slippery slope. He persuaded her to suspend her college studies and to separate from her very supportive parents. He told her that she had sexual problems about which she had never complained. Dr. Romano gradually became Carrie's primary support at a time when she was very emotionally dependent. He also discussed his own personal problems with her in a way that reminds me of a poignant line from Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Phantom of the Opera. As the physically deformed and mentally deranged Phantom begs of Christine Daae, his musical protege, say you'll share with me one love, one lifetime. Lead me, save me from my solitude. In a word, the patient was becoming the therapist's caregiver. This increasingly intimate relationship and role reversal only enhanced the depression for which Carrie had sought treatment in the first place, and she attempted to take her own life. She spent months in an excellent psychiatric hospital where she gradually began to recover her confidence, strength, and talents. She has since moved to New Mexico, where she has a very supportive husband, a college-age daughter, and a thriving career as a therapist. Carrie has made a contribution that can be useful to both professionals and clients in any helping relationship. Rather than remain angry and vindictive, Carrie has emerged from her experience with an ability to focus on her own strengths and talents and the people in her life who are important to her. This book is truly a testament to the triumph of the human spirit.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Plout, for that. And now we have Dr. Ann Philmeyer, the president of Southwestern College.
Thank you, Mari. Thank you, Carrie, and welcome to everyone here. I want to say that I was really honored to be one of the people to read the advanced copy and to write a cover blurb, but most importantly, to read this story. Because one of the things that I want to talk about is the power of the telling of the truth. And in this story, Carrie is able to take us through this journey where there's tremendous suffering and then tremendous resilience in the healing. And by her capacity to tell the truth to herself about this experience and to us, there's a medicine in this. And I think of that as story medicine, that by the telling of this, she is illuminating something that is often buried, any kind of shame, any kind of abuse, especially sexual abuse, especially by someone who had such unique power over her in this vulnerable time of her life. Some of the things that really moved me about this story, one is that she's telling us a spiritual journey of a young woman coming through this process, finding, oh, I've got my dog here, finding art as a way to really express herself, a way to trust herself because she couldn't trust the doctors and the healers and the experts. She had to find her own voice and she had to find her own truth. And she found her truth through the creation of imagery, which began to show her back her way to her soul. Another aspect of this story is how she found a way to connect it to the mythic or to the collective, because she began to understand herself and her journey as a journey of Persephone. And we understand that Persephone was seduced into the underworld by Hades. And in that seduction, there was tremendous loss and grief. But she ultimately came back. And when she did return, she brought spring with her. She brought new growth, new life. So as you know, in her journey of identifying this as a spiritual process, a process of coming to her own truth, a process of recognizing the deepness, a process of recognizing the mythic aspect of her personal journey and telling us this story, there's so much hope in it. And as Carrie found art to be healing for herself, she then chose, by coming to Southwestern College, she's one of our alumna and now one of our faculty. She chose art therapy as a tool to heal others in their journeys, which is kind of the classic mythic process. You go through that dark tunnel, you go through that dark night of the soul, and then you come back to the light, you come back to the community to help others find their way also. And so you know, I'm honored to know Carrie, to have read this story, this medicine that she's sharing with us, and to support her as she brings this book forward into the world. And this evening is part of that process of bringing it forward. So I'm happy to be part of this. I support Carrie. I've been moved and touched deeply by her story and what it has to offer us in terms of healing. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne, very much. And Michael, those were excellent personal and professional introductions. And now I will add just a little bit more about Carrie's story and kind of bring you to where she is now. After navigating the devastating losses of her early childhood, adulthood, Carrie stayed committed to make meaning of her experiences and creating a beautiful, soulful life. Her early call to be an agent of change led her to become an art therapist and life coach, and today she helps others navigate underworld journeys to create lives of meaning and purpose. She is an adjunct faculty member of Southwestern College in Santa Fe that embraces the mission of transforming consciousness through education. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico with her musician husband, Chris. Hi, Chris. With whom she loves to sing and be in nature with their beloved dog, Bruno. She's most proud to be mom to Teslin, their college-age daughter. She regularly calls upon the magic of image making to keep herself connected, happy, and whole. Now, without further ado, Carrie.
Hi, everyone. Oh my goodness, this is a mind-bending experience to be seeing all of you folks from all these different parts of the country. You know, originally, oh, hi to everybody. I'm getting these wonderful chats. This is mind-bending. You know, originally I was going to be doing a couple of launches here in Santa Fe back in April and May. And ironically, my book hit Amazon March 1st. And March 15th, the whole world was going through an underworld experience. So it was like I scratched that project. That's not that relevant right now. But I was really happy when Scott asked me to be involved in this Zoom launch and to have all these folks that are so meaningful to me, friends, families, students, colleagues. It's really mind-bending. And I want to just give you a virtual hug right now because I'm so moved. And please have your tissues handy because you will be able to cry for me and perhaps yourself because this is a very moving time to share this for me. I wanted to thank Marisol Angelo. We've had such an amazing experience working together with this project. She left and moved to Europe just after the trailer was created and then had to escape South Korea as COVID was hitting. All the while we're trying to put this together. So we've been really partners in crime creating this. And Scott Gerber of Terra Nova, thank you. Dr. Michael Plout, for all of your support through the years and you know and your heart in bringing light to this issue many years ago and continued, and Anne from Southwest College, just all of your support and love and mentorship is much appreciated. I don't know if Trisha Ware or CJ Shephers are on the call, but I wanted to give a shout out to them. They both helped me in different phases of the editorial process and they were amazing as well. And then my husband, the wonderful Chris Ishee, who's looking very serious with those engineering headphones on. Thank you, honey. I love you. Whew. Okay, I might have to cry a little bit first. I share this book as a prayer for the healing of our humanity, facing our shadows, challenging abuses of power, and embracing our healing personally and collectively is the path to a more conscious, loving, and compassionate world. So as Anne mentioned about the Persephone myth, when I sat down to write this book in earnest 9 years ago, after it actually percolating for almost 4 decades, because this happened when I was 21, I just turned 61. But I sat down 9 years ago in earnest. I felt the urgency, but I felt overwhelmed by the task because it was a monumental story. It was way too big to have lived. I don't know how I survived it, but I wanted to write about it. And I sat down with a friend of mine, Jason Hawley, who wanted to be on the call tonight, but wasn't able to make it. He's a mythology expert and an evolutionary astrologer and psychotherapist. And I told him about my urgency to write this tale. And he said, yours is the story of Persephone. And it was in that moment, like the air crackled around us. And I knew we had found this ancient myth within which for me to understand my story, and also the stories of many people that are abducted into underworld experiences. So as Anne shared, the story of Persephone is that she was the innocent maiden, the daughter of Demeter and Zeus, and she was out wandering in the field, very innocent, very untouched, you know, just completely in her wholeness. And all of a sudden, the ground opened up, and Hades, the lord of the underworld, and her uncle yanked her down, raped her, held her as his captive, and made her his queen. And in the process of her disappearing, her mother was grieving for her, and that's when winter came and there was no spring while Persephone was in the underworld. But while she was in the underworld, she went through a transformative experience that allowed her to be actually truly queen of the underworld, where she could then be guide to lost souls as they navigated that journey. So clearly Persephone was an inspiration to me. Like, there is hope after this darkness, and I was really glad to see someone had a bigger story than I did. So anyway, she inspired me, and so I would sit down and write and ask and just say, speak to me, Persephone. And the Persephone was me, the maiden who was abducted as well. So tonight, so within this story of Persephone, I'm breaking down, I'm just reading a few vignettes from the book that looks at the innocence, the abduction and held captive part, and then the rescue and transformation. So I was 21 when I had a series of events. I had just turned 21. I had a series of events that rocked my world. And in addition to that, I was suffering from an immune system breakdown, which took a long time to be diagnosed, but I had been on antibiotics for 4 years straight for acne. And I started suffering just as I'm about to launch into the world. I had very few resources internally. I had sinusitis. I wasn't able to sleep. I was having panic attacks and crippling depression. But the thing that concerned me the most and was the most disabling is I couldn't focus on my studies. I had brain fog. And so here, when I'm wanting to launch into something important in life, it's 1980. Women are really just starting to enter the professional workforce. I was just flattened out. And my parents were very concerned for me and said, come on home, honey, we'll get you consultations. Let's come up with a plan in terms of getting you out of this funk. I had been very spirited and ambitious, and I was not the daughter they knew. So anyway, I arrived in the office of Dr. Anthony Romano. I changed his name for the book on Christmas Eve, 1980. So Dr. Romano was only one of a handful of psychiatrists in our small town of Frederick, Maryland. He had an office just a mile away from my parents' house and right around the corner from the flower shop where I used to design arrangements on summer breaks. The shop had been a refuge of colors and scents, a welcome departure from my college studies in biology and psychology. It had been one of the few places where I could immerse myself in the world of beauty and delight without any guilt. At this moment, however, the pleasures of the flower shop seemed so far away. What happened to the colors, the smells? Everything was gray. Carrie? Dr. Romano stood before me, a slight man with graying temples and deep, warm blue eyes. He motioned for me to sit on a tweed couch. I glanced around while he took a leather director's chair just a few feet away. The room felt pleasant, calming. The wallpaper was light brown grass cloth and the paintings were earth-toned abstracts. I wondered what the artist was trying to express. It's kind of easy to breathe here, I thought. I like this room. It feels safe. Dr. Romano studied me intently, silently. He watched my expressions. His eyes poured deeply into mine. I quickly shifted away from his gaze and continued to scan the office. A bright ribbon of sunlight streamed through 2 clear-story windows, drawing a line of light on the floor between us. He asked questions and took an intake, wondering what my family history was and what had led up to my recent struggles. And I saw him for a number of sessions while he took in this data. During the time, I just felt that he listened tirelessly to me, showing compassion and concern. No one had ever listened to me like this before. Most of the time, I felt as if I wasn't being seen or heard at home or at school. Sure, I could be pretty, popular, perky, athletic, but that wasn't the whole me, even if that's what I felt like people wanted to see. I felt like an actress. Tears filled my eyes as I spoke of feeling lost. Dr. Romano's prompts and my insights made me feel as if I was coming home at last. I had a loving family, but we rarely talked about deep emotional stuff like this. Until now, I hadn't realized that a huge part of me seemed invisible. Talking to Dr. Romano felt as though I'd been wandering in the desert and someone had finally handed me a gallon of cool, clean water. Yes, I still felt incredibly lousy emotionally, but Dr. Romano really saw me, so now I didn't feel so crazy or alone. A few sessions later, and New Year's Eve 1980, he invited my parents in for a consultation to talk about the treatment plan and what his diagnosis was. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Tansey, I strongly feel that Carrie needs intensive psychotherapy, he said with utter authority and confidence, and she should take a break from college. Healing needs to be her top priority right now. The 3 of us sat there stunned. Leave college with only 6 months until graduation? Can't a pill lift me out of this or some good psychotherapy? I sat like a flower frozen by a sudden springtime snow. Dr. Romano continued, I think Carrie is in a significant emotional crisis. Dad struggled to keep his voice calm. Doctor, do you think she's manic depressive and needs lithium like that other doctor suggested? No, I don't think she's manic depressive. I think Carrie has an agitated depression, but she's not psychotic, nor does she have a thought disorder of any kind. Thought disorder. The words reverberated in my foggy brain. Lately, my thoughts had certainly seemed disordered to me, but I was relieved by his diagnosis. Phew, I thought I was fucked up, but maybe I'm not that fucked up. Dad continued to probe about my future. Doctor, how long do you think this will take? Dr. Romano estimated that I would need 2 to 3 years of intensive psychotherapy, 2 to 3 times a week. Carrie is very smart and insightful, a good candidate for insight-oriented psychotherapy, he said. I'd rather she not be on medication so she can do the deep emotional work she needs to recover. Insight-oriented psychotherapy. Carrie is smart, insightful. I let these encouraging words linger in my mind. I sat up a bit straighter. Somewhere beneath the layers of fetid fog inside me, a tiny voice said, "Yes, Carrie, you are." Everyone stood up and Dad reached out his hand. "Very good, Dr. Romano. This sounds like a good plan. Be direct. I like the no medicine policy. Let's all pray that Carrie can find her way through this." "Carrie will see you in the car," Mom and Dad said. They closed the door with hopeful smiles. I sat alone on the couch, feeling like a dissected frog in biology class. Oh, ick, I thought. Look what's inside this thing. "So, Carrie, how do you feel about the plan?" Dr. Romano asked. I was silent. 2 to 3 years of intensive psychotherapy felt like a mandatory sentence in addition to a very long probationary period. I wondered about living with my parents again and leaving my friends in college. I imagined getting my things from college and the humiliation of not finishing when I was so close. I was ashamed I couldn't take care of myself. I also think, Dr. Romano's voice pierced my ruminations, we need to take a look at how uncomfortable you are with your sexuality. I was back in the room and suddenly felt naked. "What?" I asked. "I think therapy can also address your discomfort with your sexuality." Had I heard him correctly? Discomfort with my sexuality? I had told him I was Catholic and we were supposed to wait till marriage to have sex, but I let the words sink in. He had waited until my parents were out of the room to spring this one on me. I was afraid to ask him what he meant by that. After all, he was the professional. I had enough to think about. Leaving college, making healing my priority, moving back home, and now there was discomfort with my sexuality? That one hadn't even been on my list of worries. So I saw him 2 to 3 times a week for the next 6 months. It was excruciating because we were exploring family dynamics while I was living at home. I felt so depressed, but I was also so eager for this spiritual awakening that seemed to also be happening at the same time. I had been sharing these mystical experiences where I would pray and meditate and I would feel light would fill the room and pain would go away. And I was just mesmerized by what the early Christians talked about in terms of laying on of hands, but also other spiritual paths in terms of light and healing and hope. But I felt split between what we were talking about and what my spiritual path was. I knew that I wanted to have him understand what I was experiencing. And so one day when I was headed down to Virginia Tech to pick up my belongings and withdraw from college formally, I had this deep sense that there was something wrong with him, like the way that mothers know there's something wrong with their child. And I started praying and sending light and love to him. The next day when I arrived in his office, he was radiant. He sat down and told me he had something important to say. I noticed that his face was relaxed, almost incandescent. "I had a crisis this weekend, Carrie. Sometimes I suffer from intense chronic pain due to a condition called trigeminal neuralgia. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling toxic, like I was going to die. I asked my fiance for help, but she just rolled over and went back to sleep, apparently disinterested. It was at this point that I said, 'I surrender, Lord. Take me.' All of a sudden, a light appeared in the room," he went on. "I let go and all the pain left me instantly. I said to myself, this must be what Carrie's talking about. I went back to sleep and I woke with a deep sense of joy and peace with no pain. I could barely contain myself. I had to let him know about my premonition. I'd been praying for you that day. I just knew there was something wrong. I just knew it. I knew it, he said, with the enthusiasm of someone who had just tapped into the wisdom of the universe. He leapt out of his chair and clasped his hands over his heart as if in prayer. I just knew it. So what if leaving college and starting psychotherapy wasn't indicative of my personal weakness, but part of a greater plan? Tony seemed happier and lighter, and now he finally understood the realities of my spiritual experiences. It made me trust him that much more. When our session was up, he asked me to come back later that night to finish talking. He met me at the door, and I took my usual seat on the couch, sitting cross-legged. I was all ears. God had truly touched him. Then out of nowhere, a jolt of skepticism penetrated my spiritual high. Is this session for him or for me? I wondered if he was billing my parents for this secret time between us. Carrie, I don't know what's happening to me. I think about you day and night. I want what you have. I want a little piece of you every day. Seeing his eyes light up that way and all the tension drain from his face made me feel enormously expansive and grateful just to be alive. I could tell he was talking about finding a larger purpose for himself and a real connection with spirit. Something was happening here that felt risky and exciting. It felt so gratifying to lead someone to his own greater truth. Well, what did he mean? A little piece of me. I'm sure he meant a little piece of God. I was about 100 sessions in, several weeks later, and I felt like I needed to address the elephant in the room. The moment arrived when I knew I had to get it out in the open. I couldn't bear to upset him, but I didn't want to lead him on and ruin our special bond. One day in session, I brought it up. I have something I feel like I need to say. I nervously glanced down at my hands. It feels like there's this barrier keeping us from going any deeper. I slid my hands down this invisible shield or wall that seemed to separate us. Sadly, back then, I didn't know that those were my boundaries. I do now. What do you think it is? He asked. I was shocked by what came out of my mouth next. I'm afraid I'm falling in love with you. He scooted to the edge of his chair. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe I'm in love with you too? His eyes brightened. Well, that's it. We can start planning to do things together. You can come to the farm. We can do things around DC. On the weekends, I'd love to take you to the opera. This is just great. I sat there in stunned silence. I had just said, I'm afraid I'm falling in love with you, emphasis on the word afraid. And he continued talking, oblivious. He had just broken up with his fiancée, and now he was acting like a kid in the candy shop who had permission to grab whatever he wanted. Did he break up with her because of me? Suddenly, I sensed a ball of light quivering in my belly, and I felt it leave my body and rush into his. Paralysis swept over me as if I'd gotten hit with a blow dart big enough to stun a rhinoceros. What just happened? How do I get my sense of self back? Now that I had named my fear, the barrier between us seemed to dissolve, but so did my sense of being separate from him and what he wanted from me. The room started spinning like a top. I could feel myself floating out of my body. Wait, I silently screamed. Wait, I thought I could say anything in therapy and we'd explore it together. I thought we were here to examine feelings, not act on them. I didn't mean it. I don't know how to say I'm afraid you're falling in love with me. Wait. That day, as I left the building, I was nauseous and my whole body felt as heavy as lead. I could sense Tony back in the office jumping up and down with delight. I walked slowly under the weight of dread and a deep sense of foreboding. I was finally getting better, and now this wasn't what I wanted. I only wanted to heal and move on. That night at dinner, I sat like a mannequin. My family was so used to my mood swings that no one even asked what was wrong. The wheels of my mind were spinning as I considered what to do. I had to take it back. I'd call him and tell him he'd misunderstood me. After everyone went to bed, I quietly made my way to the basement to use the phone. I couldn't think, let alone sleep. I had to get this cleared up. Tony answered with a warm, dreamy voice. Oh, it's you. I took a deep breath and blurted out, I think you misunderstood me. I think I misspoke. I think maybe I shouldn't have said that. I love you. I really love you. I don't, however, want that kind of relationship with you. I just want to explore my concern that we're getting too close. His warm tone instantly cooled. He became authoritative. What? What? I can't believe I'm hearing you say that. What happened? How did you change your feelings that fast? You know that's impossible, don't you? We have to talk about this tomorrow in person. He ended the call abruptly. The next morning, I dragged myself to his office building, terrified of what might happen. What happened, Carrie? You know that's impossible for your feelings to shift that fast. I'm wondering if this is your fear of intimacy revealing itself. I felt my resolve crumbling. Now that we were face to face, I couldn't think of what to say. I wanted to take it back, but what if he was right? Oh God, I guess I'm really fucked up. I must be in love with him because he's in love with me, right? I loved my doctor and I wanted to protect him, but I didn't want a romantic relationship with him. I just wanted him to keep being my doctor, my mentor. He was clearly suffering and it was all my fault. What I really meant was, I'm afraid you're falling in love with me, so why didn't I say that? Why couldn't I say it now? I sat there paralyzed. I just wanted things to be back to the way they had been. I didn't trust my family anymore. I had lost track of my friends. I was totally alone but him. So I was willing to say anything just to gain the peace between us. I decided to save his feelings by lying about mine. Well, I think I'm feeling that way again. Tony smiled and took a deep breath. It was a few weeks later that he invited me to his farm in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He wanted to show me where he sat by the stream, where he had his transcendental experiences, and invited me to go horseback riding with his daughter and walk on the grounds that were just beautiful in the Blue Ridge. He thought it would be important for me to get away from my family, who he thought were quite toxic for me. He said I could stay at his daughter's farm or at his farm. He had multiple bedrooms. We got down there late at night, and there was no Mary Jane, his daughter, and there was no horses. And before I know it, he handed me a bong and told me, please, smoke with me. This helps me relax on the weekends. So I smoked 3 hits of homegrown pot on his farm, and then he gave me wine, which he didn't drink, and I blacked out. I don't remember what else happened that weekend. I don't even remember how I got home. But 3 days later, at the house, at my parents' house, I was sitting up in my bedroom, and I realized I couldn't tell my parents. They'd be furious with me if they knew I'd snuck out with Tony. I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. This had to stay between me and Tony, or it was over. My therapy, his career, my life. I lay down on my bed, surrounded by my textbooks. I put my hands on them. They were real. My plans were real. I would excel. I would not become paralyzed by depression as I had at Virginia Tech. I would finish college no matter what. No one needed to know about what happened 3 days ago. That was the past. My doctor was my ally, my mentor, my friend. He would get me through this. With my feet on the floor and my hands on the books, I grounded and comforted myself. These books were my way out. My studies were my way out. I shook my head. I felt a large, dark hole open up inside my belly as I felt myself falling, going down into a void where there was no sound, no light, nothing to hold on to. In the void, there was no God, no Tony, no family, no me. My feet on the floor and my hands on the book steadied me. I am a good student and I am still here. So I stayed in this dual relationship for 2.5 years, completely split on wanting to love this person who had helped me and seen so much of me, and this man at the same time who was increasingly objectifying and using me sexually and emotionally abusing me to keep me under his thumb. I finished college, which was so important to me during that time, and somehow I got accepted into a PhD program. But his son was in the same program with me, and there were 11 of us in the class. So I had this huge secret that I wouldn't dare tell, or he would be ruined, his son would be ruined, and I would be ruined. And I just didn't want to tell my parents. I thought they would be devastated to hear I'd been living this secret life. The pressure of holding the secret, of protecting him, and trying to focus my overwhelmed brain, all the while he was showing more and more craziness and jealousy, I knew I had to get out of it. So I bravely ended it, telling him I wasn't in love with him anymore, and I didn't know if I ever was. I was so hopeful that being free of this relationship, things would change. But sadly, I took myself off the sleeping pills and tranquilizers I had used in the relationship with him, and I started having horrible panic attacks, nightmares, and again, I couldn't focus in school. I had just been given a prestigious fellowship, and I had no idea how I was going to be able to function. I didn't want to live anymore. And I already thought, for some crazy reason, I had been in 3.5 years of therapy, and the doctor who loved me couldn't help me. I was hopeless. So I attempted suicide and was let out after 10 days, and then attempted again shortly thereafter. And then when I came to, the doctor said, "You have no idea how serious this is. We will not let you go. We will commit you if you don't go with our plans." And so I was shipped off to Shepherd Pratt. And now my parents, like Zeus and Demeter, race down to Virginia to get me, and we are headed up I-95. My father's gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, his body rigid with tension. I was in the back seat with Mom sitting dutifully beside me, holding my arm tightly. The three of us sat in silence. Outside the car windows, it was summer in Virginia, leafy and green. As we neared the exit for King's Dominion Amusement Park, the highway seemed to be buzzing with other station wagons and vans, packed with kids wiggling with anticipation. I imagined them screaming, hair flying back as the roller coaster sped downward towards oblivion, and wondered why fear makes human beings feel so alive. King's Dominion was probably the part of summer they'd be talking about for weeks from now. I wondered what I'd be doing over the summer vacation, and then turned my eyes back inside the car to see a family outing that wasn't so jovial. A ridiculous thought came to me, as if it were channeled from my old zany self, the lighter part of me that had already crossed over and died. Just another typical family outing. Gidget goes to the insane asylum. I started to crack up at the absurdity of it all. Mine is the real roller coaster, boys and girls. At first, Dad looked alarmed. Then he quickly loosened up on the wheel, and he too started laughing. "I'll bet those guys in the white coats will slap a straitjacket on your mother as soon as they see her red shoes," he joked. I imagined my saintly looking mom with her perfectly round silver bun on top of her head being escorted away down a white hallway in a stiff white straitjacket, her red shoes the only color in the scene. "No, I swear she's the patient," she would yell, pointing at me, and the orderlies would say, "Yeah, right, lady." Then I could quick make a getaway and let my mom be committed instead of myself. I chuckled to myself. Through our laughter, I had managed to embrace the unconditional love of my parents, who were just as scared as I was, believing that as hard as this day was, I could descend no lower. From here, I would begin fighting my way upward, out of the underworld. Slowly, one finger at a time, I was digging my way through the crust. So I was there for about a month or so and had a treatment team meeting, and the head of the hospital sat in and said, "We're very concerned about what happened with you and Dr. Anthony Romano, and we recommend as part of your treatment plan that you take action against him. We think he's very dangerous. We have asked the head of the hospital who he would never want to go up against in a malpractice suit against the hospital, and he said Earl Plumhoff. He gave me the name of the attorney at my first treatment team meeting. I was very ambivalent and still feeling like it was all my fault. But I started going to art therapy groups, and I was painting away and accessing aspects of myself I had completely forgotten about. I was starting to feel like a little light was coming in, but I still didn't want to take him to court. It was still my fault. Through my bedroom window, I noticed that the moon was brighter than usual. Maybe there was hope for me. Mystic and psychiatrist Carl Jung said that the psyche speaks to us through symbols rather than words, or more than words. Here I'd verbally rehashed my ordeal 100 times over, but never once had I given myself credit for surviving it. The drawings helped me do that. I couldn't wait to go back to the studio. If I had my way, I'd be there every day, every hour, painting away all the remnants of my madness. I wanted to go as often as possible so I could expel every last drop of angst. I wanted to be done with all the mud and the monsters and the ugliness and the trauma, and was eager to put them where they belonged, on paper or canvas, releasing them from my mind and heart. After painting and sketching for weeks, I continued to unearth more and more positive aspects of myself, which I could nurture and trust. One day in art therapy, I felt extremely lighthearted and found it easier than usual to draw. I grabbed some colored chalk and made a quick, simple drawing of abstract shapes on black paper. I tacked it on the board and headed back to my seat. Holy shit, said Richard, a wonderful man who was in there recovering from the heartbreak of losing his partner. He stared, transfixed. My God, Carrie, another voice rang out. Others grasped, Jesus Christ, Carrie. I spun around and took a look at the image from a distance. I froze. I hadn't really seen it before. Dozens of jagged penis-shaped parts were pointing inward from all directions, stabbing at the void in the center. Dark shades of red, blue, and black pulsated with pain. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized that this drawing of mine was telling a story of repeated psychic rape. Audrey, the art therapist, addressed the shock in the room. Do you want to tell us about your image, Carrie? I answered in an unnatural monotone voice. I guess I was abused by my shrink. Those who were still working popped up their heads from their unfinished pieces. For a few minutes, we just sat there examining what had sprung out of me. All were quiet. I fled the studio and practically ran over the orderly who was following me. I closed the door. I felt as if a dam built of numbness, rationalization, denial had been holding back my grief, but now it had crumbled irrevocably. A flood of sorrow and betrayal surged forth, drowning me. My entire body heaved with deep, urgent sobs. The door flew open and a nurse reminded me that I wasn't allowed to shut it or be alone. I collapsed on the floor behind the bed in an effort to gain some privacy. The flood washed over me and my self-blame, my misconceptions. I had been emotionally and spiritually violated and psychically shattered, sexually objectified and exploited by the man I trusted, a doctor my parents had paid to heal me, a mentor with whom I had shared my deepest spiritual yearnings and dreams of a beautiful life, a person whom I believed to be a father figure, a healer, my closest friend. I couldn't condone Tony's behavior any longer. It had almost killed me. My body convulsed and I cried myself to sleep. So that was the turning point in me seeing what had actually really happened and coming out of the gaslighting mental fucking fog of this powerful man who had used me for what he wanted, not for my own personal healing. And so long story short, that was 1980s. Well, then I went to trial and you have to read the book for more, for more information, but did take him to court, won two court battles, took him to the ethics committee, testified, as Michael Platt said, before the Maryland General Assembly to form a task force, and then found out in the meantime he did it again, that he was already seducing another client, actually during my trial against him. So that made me willing to talk to the press when they approached me. And in many ways, though, as sad as it was that someone else was violated, a little switch turned on in me, like, this is not about me. This is about you. But realized that I wasn't responsible for the abuse, but I was responsible for reclaiming my life and healing. And that has been my life's trajectory. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Carrie, for sharing. This is really powerful. And I know it's hard sometimes with, not being able to applaud, but I invite you to click your gallery screen so we can all give you a silent applause. And I just want to very quickly share that image that you were talking about toward the end. And if you want to, I pulled it up on your Instagram actually, and I'll drop the Instagram link also. But this is the image that Carrie was, do you want to say a couple of words about it, Carrie?
Yeah, it was so remarkable in terms of the power of art therapy, because I was in a very jovial mood when I sat down and I just was unconsciously just doodling, and I still doodle to this day. It's my form of really releasing what my truth is. But I was, I just put it up there and then put it up on the wall and turned around, like kind of floating back, like I'm getting the hang of this. And then everyone was like freaked out. And then I saw it. So it was so powerful that even after I created it, until other people saw it and reacted, I didn't really let it in. So that, after having been abused by a doctor, obviously trusting therapists was a huge struggle for me. But I could begin to trust these images that were pouring out of me. And they were ugly, they were monsters. And I had to give myself permission for them to be really ugly and not aesthetically pleasing. And the more I allowed myself to do that, the more this stuff moved out of me. And to this day, I still doodle on a regular basis and work in clay as well, just to access what's going on inside of me if I just want to feel more connected with myself. And the days of the hardcore trauma are over, but the desire to, on a daily basis, connect with my deepest self is still very much there, as for all of us. So thank you for sharing that.
So much. And now we want to open the floor up to some questions. We have a couple comments in the chat, just in case you missed them. Carrie, Magdalena Karlik said, so very moving, Carrie, thank you for the depth and of sharing and poetry. Valerie Valentine said, you are so beautiful and so powerful. Thank you for being so strong and courageous. And Sherry Young, beautiful story of healing and transformation. Thank you for your joy. And we have our first question from Valerie Valentine. Valerie, do you want to pop in and ask your question?
Sure, I just wanted to give Carrie a chance to tell us what her desire for the book is and what she really hopes will come from all of her work, and for her, revealing her story and really being so courageous with it.
Thank you, Valerie. Great question. I guess the first thing is that I think for years, due to the medical model, which has certainly allowed a lot of advancements in many ways, but also has been a deterrent in, I think, really capturing the inner journeys of people. I wish the DSM would have, vignettes of what people actually go through as they describe different diagnoses. It's, I'd like to get to be a society that, instead of asking what's wrong with people, asking what's happened to people. Because everyone has a story, and people that wind up with substance abuse issues and a lot of trauma and a lot of psychiatric diagnoses often have, more often than not, have horrendous trauma that they've never spoken about. So I just wanted to share my story to sort of like, be a guide for other people to share their stories. And I also feel like there's the primary, there have been so many lessons in this for me, but the primary lesson has been about shifting from external authority in my life to an internal authority. And certainly the art has helped that. But having been raised in a very patriarchal family and a religious family, very loving family in many ways, but the authority was outside. I was really kind of set up for this kind of handing over my power. Now, granted, you should be able to trust the person in power. But too often, as we know, there's so much power abuse that happens. But I hope it inspires abuse survivors to never give up on themselves, to really continue to commit to deep work. And I also want to train therapists in terms of boundaries and self-care. And when I look back, this man was not served well by the licensing board. He continued to practice and did it again. He should have been in much more extensive treatment. His hand was slapped for 6 months for supervision, and 6 months of supervision. And I think he was very, very ill. And, if you're well, you don't have to use your patience like that. So, I'd like to just see more awareness around that as well. And then also a holistic paradigm. It took years for me to discover that I actually was having an immune system breakdown. And, now we talk a lot more about gut health and the relationship to mental health. And it's like a lot of people have been on antibiotics, birth control pills, things that disrupt their overall immune system and ability to have internal resources. And unless those things are really looked at sensitively, you're already having someone that is compromised. In addition to any kind of emotional issues, they go hand in hand. So I guess a holistic paradigm I would really be calling for. Thank you, Valerie.
And we have a couple more comments. Molly Punkovich, I hope I said that right, says, the way you embody transformation is so inspiring to me. Thank you, Carrie. And we have another question that takes us back to Dr. Romano.
Mm-hmm.
Sandy Sabat asked, actually, Sandy, would you ask your question?
Sure. Kara, I've always wondered if you know whether or not Dr. Romano knows about your book.
We believe that he's deceased. all the research that he was 31 years older than me. So think about it. I'm 61, he'd be 92. The research that we did, my editor and I, it sounded like his practice was closed and that we couldn't find anything about him. He did continue to practice both after the situation with me and then also again after the situation with the second client. And I think he was practicing as recently as like 5-10 years ago. So yeah. And I think, like I said, I think he was a really broken man, and I release him. I can't say that I entirely forgive him, but I release him, and I would hope that his soul has found peace, and I would just hope that people like this who abuse power really get the help they need, and that society gets protected from them, because he should not have been practicing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. And another comment from Holly Skinner: "You are beautiful and your story is so profound. I am so proud of you, my friend," she says. And do we have any more questions? If you'd like to indicate it in the chat, and we'll kind of pass the mic on to you. I know that Carrie has given us a lot tonight. And we have a question from Brad. Brad, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, Carrie. That was incredible. I can feel it in my gut. My question was, how do you now as a therapist use self-disclosure? Do you use it at all? Because you have such a powerful story, and yet it can be, a double-edged sword. I don't know. That's the question.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I would just say that I'm navigating that. There have been a few times I've shared specifically with clients. There also have been clients that have found my book online. So now that it's out there, I suspect there will be more people that will just come to that. And that was certainly a question about, what, and I guess the question, if someone asks me about it, I'll share a little bit about it, and then we get right back to what's going on with them. So, but I definitely, really, but I do share that I feel a lot of hope in being a therapist, because I've walked the journey, but I've also witnessed many others. One of my favorite parts of the book is when I talk about the fellow psychiatric patients in the hospital and their amazing stories. And I mean, that part still makes me cry when I read it, because again, like, things happen to these people. It wasn't just what was wrong with them, it's what happened to them. And so I saw people get better. And so, I just come to the practice with a lot of hope, but that will be an ongoing, and I'll definitely watch my boundaries if people start asking more deeply personal questions, although I pretty much lay it out there in the book. So there's a lot I didn't say, but there's a hell of a lot I did say. So we'll see we'll see where this goes. But I always want to do the best job I can in making it be about the person's work, not mine. Yeah.
And Suzanne, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, I just put in the chat. I just wondered, hi Carrie.
Hi, Suzanne.
I just wondered about the pseudonym and why protect his identity in the book instead of just putting his real name in.
Well, they certainly could have, because there was a lot of press locally and nationally with his name in it, but I felt protective of his family. They didn't do it, he did. And when it came right down to it, I just didn't feel that I didn't feel like I needed him to suffer for me to get better, or for this to be, it was like, I really thought about that. But when it came right down to it, I thought, I don't need to rake him over the coals with this. He's gone through 2 trials, he's gone. And but it was the primary motive was about protecting his family.
Okay.
I have a question. Story, how are you, Carrie? It was wonderful. Oh, it was so inspirational. I have a quick question. Oh my gosh, and I just lost it. Oh my goodness. Give me a minute, it'll come back. So go to someone else.
Okay, good to see you. Good to see all of you. Holly Skinner, I don't see your face. Where are you? Holly Skinner is my best friend from high school. Where is she? I know. Holly Skinner, where are you? Anyway,
Okay.
that's what's so amazing
Waiting.
about Zoom, right? There she is. Hi. Yeah.
And then if anybody else has a question, since you're all being very quiet, you can just pop in and ask your question.
I remembered the question. Did he ever show any remorse?
That's a good question. He acted very heartbroken and fell apart on the stand and just wailed and stopped the proceedings. He was so hurt. He was so devastated. I think he was a lot more worried about him than me.
Yeah.
For people who have read the book,
He
would you
was the
agree?
victim now,
What'd you say?
right?
What?
Hold on, let me make sure. He was the victim now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible.
I mean, he might have felt some of it. What I witnessed was in the trials, so he was obviously under a lot of pressure. But I mean, he could have, handled it so differently. He could have, the first time he found himself crossing boundaries, he could have said, wait, I need to bring your parents in. We need to come up with a different plan. I need to refer you to someone else. I'm not able to be impartial. He could have handled that early on, and it would have, I really almost died. So it's inexcusable to so repeatedly cross boundaries and put a client in jeopardy like that.
Yeah. Well, as you said, it was an abuse of power. And yeah, it's incredible. Well, thank you for your story.
Thank you, Dorrit, for being here. Nancy Ingram. Where is Nancy Ingram? My dear friend from college. Where is she?
Hi, Carrie.
Hey, Nance.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so glad to see you, and thank you for sharing such a moving story. I'm still choked up about it, as you can see. But my question is about how you guide or advise patients or clients you see who have also been traumatized in terms of testifying or reporting. And if you've, just if you can share, of course, keeping the confidentiality.
Sure. Well, I have not had it come up much in my practice in terms of this kind of abuse. There was someone that was starting to describe these things, and it was tricky because I felt very protective and very concerned. And she wound up, I referred her, she wound up going to another therapist not long after that. And I think she might have felt, the level of my intensity a little bit about like, tell me more, right? So I was aware in that moment, like, ooh, this could be tricky to see how to support her on her timing to identify. And she did actually eventually take action. She went and saw a friend of mine who's a very good therapist, and she did take action. So that was a good thing. But I have had people, report very poorly handled therapeutic breakdowns by colleagues, and just really creating time and space for them to share and look at what they learned from that and what they need, and talk about our collaboration, and really bringing in a sense of openness in terms of if there's a breakdown in communication, how do we work through that, and the commitment to do so. Because the times that I've heard, the ethical violations I heard were where therapists really abruptly terminated people and did not engage in a process of exploration of what was really happening. So not so much from the sexual piece, but I do know that it is happening here in Santa Fe. It's happening everywhere, and I hear stories about it. Yeah. And it could be interesting now that my book is out that I might hear more stories about it, right? So I'll be navigating all of that with consultation, supervision, right? Because I know that it would be hard to be entirely impartial, right?
Yeah.
Great question, Anne.
So helpful to all of us.
Thank you, dear. Good to see you.
And
we
have,
did I see Aline?
Yes. One or two more questions, I think, and then Aline. There we go.
Oh, hi, Carrie. Oh my God, you've just touched us all so deeply. I do have a question for you because in hearing you talk about at the time that you were at such a low point emotionally and spiritually, you still wanted to please somebody. And I feel like that's such a characteristic of females in general, is that we want to please, that we want to, make things symbiotic. It's part of the, double-edged sword that we have. We want to be those people. And I just wonder, how much do you think this happens on the reverse side? Do you think that men have this, like, is there a similar rate of any kind of sexual abuse by female? I mean, therapists, I just feel like it's such a female trait that we just want to please so deeply that even when your mind is muddy, there's still that sense that
Absolutely.
that's an
That
unbelievable.
caretaking piece and the wanting to help heal. And, the reality is I did have a path as a healer lined up, right? So I was already trying to do it, but in very inappropriate circumstances, right? Yeah, the statistics are such that it's way less frequent with female therapists, with male patients or female patients. That does happen. But and maybe Michael Plout can speak to that too, because he certainly knows a little bit more about the incidents. But there's been research done over the years that I think Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there at one point in time, there was like 7 to 15% of psychologists reported having at least one client who came in who had been abused by a therapist. And just in my circle and talking to people, I'm just amazed at how many people have come forward and said, my mother was abused, or my sister was abused, or there was a situation like with a teacher, a professor, something similar in terms of power abuse. So I think that the statistics are very much more male to female. What's interesting about what the research that I looked at, and again, Michael Plout could chime in on this, but it seemed that that very often the perpetrator, the person who is violating the boundaries, is someone more seasoned in their profession, and they've had many years of not acting out. So they are at a low point in their life. They are suffering. They are isolated. I mean, clearly, as Michael Plout quoted from the Phantom of the Opera, it was like, this man was really, really lonely. And the longer that I was with him, the more that I saw that. So the less that I saw him on this, looking up to him, right? Because I just saw, oh my gosh, and I just saw, I think he's jealous of my relationship with my family. I think he's jealous that I have friends, but he was slowly just trying to whittle away all of that. And I was just young and naive, and I was quite frankly very gaslighted, and I didn't want to believe, it was like that betrayal bond. I didn't want to believe this man I trusted so much was so busy ravaging my psyche. I wanted to believe that I was just fucked up. Scary.
I can make a
yeah,
I can make a couple of comments if I may. Yeah, we actually did some research on some of the cases in Maryland that we dealt with over the years I was there, and published it in 2013 in a law journal, actually. If anybody would like a copy, let me know. But these things happen in all 4 gender combinations. Mostly it's male as the abuser and female as the victim, but we do see all 4 gender combinations. I also want to say something about reporting, because many people who are victimized don't want to report.
Mm-hmm.
And we can be very coercive in encouraging them to report when they're not really ready to, and when it's not in their best interest. And I can tell you one story that really highlights that. I testified as an expert witness in a board hearing where the patient was also a nurse, and the psychologist had a female attorney, another thing that means you can't generalize from gender. And this female attorney said to me on the stand, she's a nurse, she knows the rules, isn't this partly her responsibility? The answer to that question is no, it's always the therapist's responsibility. It doesn't matter who the patient is. But what happened after that, that psychologist's license was revoked as a result of that hearing. But that woman also committed suicide after her husband divorced her. And she had to go through the trauma of this hearing, which was not a public hearing. So I think we have to help people make their own decisions in their own time in a way that's really best for them. And as Carrie has pointed out so beautifully, this isn't really about punishing the offender as much as recovering your own life and your own strength, regardless of what happens to that person. Because if you base your well-being on what happens to that offender, you can spend the whole rest of your life being angry.
Any other questions? Thank you, Michael. It's tricky stuff. And I think for all of us that are therapists here, I think getting consultation, right? Having supervision, talking about the cases as they come in, as we hear them, and really supporting people in making the decisions for themselves. You know, quite frankly, it's kind of astounding when I look back on it that the folks at the hospital were so clear with me about, we think you need to take action. They did also tell me, though, that if I didn't take action, they would. So I knew he was going to be held accountable. So if I didn't know that, I probably, or if they hadn't given me the name of the attorney, I don't know that I would have taken action. And I think taking action for me was very important. It was devastating to go through those very public trials. It was horrifying. And the victim gets blamed a lot. And there was all sorts of slippery tactics that they did in court. But ultimately it did, it got me back on a path of empowerment. So in my case, I think it was important, but I had a lot of PTSD from the trials too. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, Carrie, thank you so much for giving us so much of you tonight. I know I've really appreciated knowing you and knowing your story. And it's clear to me what a huge impact your story is having and will have. Do you have any parting words that you'd like to share?
I wish I could give everybody a hug, because it's just amazing to see all these faces, including some students of mine and friends from Val, my friend Val was there. I had just gotten out of the psychiatric hospital to apply for my first job in the bookstore. And, I told her what happened. I just got out of the psychiatric hospital and she still hired me and we became good friends. Yeah. So I thank you, Anne. Thank you, Michael and Scott and Madi and everyone who's come here. And I just hope that we can continue just to have an open conversation about what healing is, and that people feel really inspired to not just feel better, but really embrace life at a whole nother level. I think trauma can be an initiation to a higher state of consciousness if you work it. And I hope I'm happy to be part of that every day. And I'm totally imperfect as a therapist too. I mean, it's like, it's a dance, right? This work, it's a dance with working with humans, but it's an honor.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we will be following up with everybody probably next week, since it's Friday now. And we'll be following up with some links. If you haven't had a chance to buy the book, we'll send you Carrie's Instagram, where she actually posts some of the art that she works on right now, and some inspirational quotes and things like that. And of course, we'll share the video so you can have it and share it far and wide, please. And thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.